Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something fascinating, stepping back in time to 1914. It's a world just, well, teetering right on the edge. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the really intricate global landscape, the escalating tensions that tragically ignited the First World War. And we're going to explore it all through the incredibly insightful lens of Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern World History, the 5th edition. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding a truly pivotal and, let's face it, complex moment in history, hopefully giving you those aha moments without getting bogged down.
It really is a fascinating period, and Lowe's approach is so valuable because he doesn't just tell you what happened. He really digs into the different ways historians have tried to explain why it happened, which is crucial, right? It's not just a list of events. It's about understanding how we even try to grasp something this huge, this complex, like 1914.
Absolutely. So let's start by painting a picture of that world in 1914. Europe's dominance was undeniable, but what did that actually look like in terms of power dynamics?
Well, in 1914, Europe was, without doubt, the global center. I mean, most big world-shaping decisions, they were made in European capitals. And within Europe, Germany really stood out. It was the leading power, both militarily and crucially economically. Industrially, Germany had actually overtaken Britain in producing pig iron and steel. Britain still led in coal, mind you, but Germany's rise was dramatic. Of course, you had other significant industrial players too: France, Belgium, Italy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Russia's industry was growing fast, but it started from so far behind it wasn't really challenging Germany or Britain yet.
But it wasn't just Europe making strides industrially, was it?
Oh, not at all. Outside Europe, you had the USA making just spectacular progress over the previous few decades. By 1914, the U.S. was actually producing more coal, pig iron, and steel than either Germany or Britain, a real powerhouse. And then there's Japan. It had modernized at an incredible speed, especially after beating Russia in that 1904-05 war. It really emerged as a significant force.
Okay, so we have these major industrial powers. But politically, were they all singing from the same hymn sheet? What do their systems look like? Let's unpack this.
Good question, because politically they were really quite different. You had democratic governments like the USA, Britain, and France, elected parliaments, real power there. But then you had systems that were, let's say, less democratic than they appeared. Germany, for instance, had an elected Reichstag, but the real levers of power were with the Chancellor and the Kaiser. Italy and Japan also had elected lower houses, but the right to vote was pretty restricted. And in Japan, the Emperor and his Privy Council held most of the cards. And then at the other end, you had the really autocratic systems: Russia under the Tsar and Austria-Hungary under its Emperor King. Parliaments existed, sure, but they were mostly just advisory.
And this period also saw this huge burst of imperial expansion. Here's where it gets really interesting. What was driving that scramble for Africa and the moves in China?
Exactly. After about 1880, things really kicked off. The European powers, plus the USA and Japan, got heavily into imperial expansion. Imperialism, basically, building empires by grabbing overseas territory. The scramble for Africa is the classic example. It was largely driven by, well, the hunt for new markets for their goods and also securing new sources of raw materials. And we saw something similar in China, which was weakening. These powers forced China to grant trading concessions. This eventually contributed to the fall of the old Manchu dynasty and the setup of a republic there in 1911.
So you put it all together, this global competition, these vastly different political systems, this relentless drive for empires. You can almost feel the underlying friction building up, can't you?
Absolutely. It was a really volatile mix, and it definitely set the stage for how Europe then kind of divided itself into these two big armed camps.
Right, the famous armed camps. You have the Triple Alliance, that's Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and then the Triple Entente, bringing together Britain, France, and Russia. And Lowe mentions that 1902 alliance between Japan and Britain, too. He points out that friction between these blocs had nearly caused war several times already since 1900.
That's right. And the friction came from several places. There was a really intense naval rivalry, particularly between Britain and Germany. Germany wanted a fleet to challenge Britain globally. France, meanwhile, never really got over losing Alsace-Lorraine to Germany back in 1871. That was a deep, lingering resentment. Germany, for its part, felt hemmed in. They accused Britain, Russia, and France of trying to encircle them. Plus, they were kind of disappointed with their Weltpolitik, their world policy. Their empire was smaller and less profitable than others.
And Russia had its own set of worries.
Oh, definitely. Russia was deeply suspicious of Austria's ambitions down in the Balkans, and they were also increasingly concerned about Germany's growing military muscle and economic strength. But Norman Lowe points to what he calls probably the most dangerous cause of friction, and that was Serbian nationalism.
Right. This idea of a greater Serbia sounds like it was incredibly powerful. What was the core threat there exactly?
It really was potent. Serbian nationalism was this intense desire to unite all Serbs and Croats into one big state, a greater Serbia or Yugoslavia. The huge problem was many of these Serbs and Croats lived inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that empire was already this, well, ramshackle mix of different nationalities: Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Serbs, Croats, and others. So this Serbian ambition was seen as a direct, almost existential threat. If the Serbs and Croats broke away, maybe others would follow. The whole empire could unravel. This led some in Austria to push for a preventive war to crush Serbia before it got too strong, and it fueled huge resentment towards Russia for backing Serbia.
So you have these deep, deep resentments, these tangled alliances, building tensions, and then this series of crises in the years just before 1914, like a drumbeat getting louder.
Exactly. It really is like watching dominoes being set up one after another, each crisis just ratcheting up the tension that little bit more.
Let's walk through a few of those key pre-war crises, low highlights.
Okay. The first big one was the Moroccan crisis of 1905-06. Germany basically tried to test the new Anglo-French friendship, the Entente Cordiale, and maybe grab some territory. But it backfired. At the Algeciras conference, Britain, Russia, Italy, Spain, they all backed France. It was a diplomatic slapdown for Germany. And it actually strengthened Anglo-French ties, leading to secret military talks between them.
Then the British agreement with Russia in 1907. Germany saw that as more encirclement, right?
They absolutely did. This agreement sorted out long-standing rivalries between Britain and Russia in places like Persia and Afghanistan. It wasn't a military alliance, but Germany saw it as proof they were being hemmed in. Then came the Bosnia crisis in 1908. Austria went ahead and formally annexed Bosnia. This was a direct blow to Serbia, which wanted Bosnia itself. Serbia looked to Russia for help, but Germany stood firmly behind Austria. Russia, still weak after the war with Japan, had to back down, so Austria kept Bosnia. A win for the Austro-German alliance, sure, but Serbia was left furious, and Russia felt humiliated. Russia then started a massive military buildup, determined not to be caught out like that again.
And then another Moroccan issue, the Agadir Crisis in 1911. That really seemed to pour fuel on the naval race fire.
Yes, that one was tense. French troops occupied Fez in Morocco. Germany responded by sending a gunboat, the Panther, to the port of Agadir, maybe hoping for compensation elsewhere, like the French Congo. But Britain got worried. Could Agadir become a German naval base threatening their trade routes? Lloyd George, who was chancellor then, made a famous speech, the Mansion House speech, basically warning Germany off. The Entente held firm again. Germany got very little territory in the Congo, and it looks like another diplomatic defeat. This really stirred up anti-British feeling in Germany and pushed the naval race harder.
And finally, the Balkan Wars in 1912 and 1913. They seem almost like a dress rehearsal.
In many ways, yes. The First Balkan War saw the Balkan countries team up and attack Turkey, grabbing most of its remaining European land. But Serbia was frustrated because Austria, with German and even British support, insisted on creating an independent Albania, blocking Serbia's access to the sea. This led directly to the Second Balkan War, where Bulgaria attacked Serbia and got defeated. Now, Anglo-German cooperation did seem to prevent it spiraling into a wider war then, but the results were dangerous. Serbia emerged stronger, bolder, and more determined to challenge Austria-Hungary. Austria was equally determined to stop Serbia, and Germany unfortunately seemed to misread Britain's role, thinking London could perhaps be pulled away from France and Russia, a crucial miscalculation.
So after all these near misses, all this simmering tension, how did one single event in Sarajevo in June 1914 manage to light the fuse on this whole powder keg?
That single event, of course, was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. He and his wife Sophie were shot dead in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, by a young Bosnian Serb nationalist, Gavrilo Princip. Austria-Hungary immediately pointed the finger at the Serbian government. They issued this incredibly harsh ultimatum to Serbia. And even though Serbia actually agreed to most of the demands, quite surprisingly, Austria wasn't satisfied. Crucially, Austria had received what's called the blank check from Germany, basically, unconditional support. So they used the assassination as the perfect excuse to declare war on Serbia, which they'd wanted to do anyway.
And from that point, it just cascaded. The war declarations came thick and fast, almost like clockwork.
Unbelievably fast. It was almost mechanical. July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The very next day, July 29th, Russia orders a general mobilization. They weren't going to let Serbia down again this time. July 31st. Germany demands Russian stop mobilizing. Russia doesn't. August 1st. Germany declares war on Russia. August 3rd. Germany declares war on France, assuming France would back Russia. August 4th. German troops march into neutral Belgium, following their Schlieffen Plan. Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality, so London demands withdrawal. Germany ignores it. Britain declares war on Germany. Then August 6th. Austria-Hungary finally declares war on Russia, and just like that, the major powers of Europe were at war.
And the immediate result, Germany suddenly wasn't the master of Europe anymore, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
And Europe itself never really got back its dominant position in the world after that, did it?
No, it really marked the beginning of the end of European global dominance, a truly world-changing moment.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the big historical debate. What really caused the war? And who, if anyone, was to blame? Norman Lowe makes it clear even today historians just can't agree.
That's absolutely right. The one thing everyone agrees on is the spark. The quarrel between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, triggered by the assassination. Austria definitely used it as an excuse for that preventive war they wanted against Serbia, hoping, perhaps naively, it would just stay a local conflict. But that only explains the trigger. It doesn't explain why it blew up into a world war involving all the great powers.
Okay, so what are the main theories Lowe discusses for that escalation?
Well, one classic theory blames the alliance system itself. These two armed camps, the argument goes, made war almost automatic. Once one power was involved, the others were dragged in. But, as Lowe points out, critics say, hang on, plenty of crises didn't lead to war before 1914. And the alliances weren't always ironclad. Italy, for example, ended up fighting against Germany and Austria. Then there's colonial rivalry. The idea that Germany's disappointment over not getting a big enough empire made them more aggressive. But again, most colonial disputes had actually been settled peacefully before 1914, and Anglo-German relations, surprisingly, were pretty decent right before the war broke out, which leads to the naval race between Britain and Germany. That was definitely a source of tension, no doubt, with Germany building its big dreadnought battleships. Yet Germany had actually cut back naval spending in 1913 to focus on its army. And Britain felt reasonably secure in its naval lead by 1914, so maybe not the main driver at that moment.
What about the economic angle? Was it all about money and trade?
There's a Marxist interpretation that says German capitalists pushed for war to achieve economic dominance, especially over Britain. But the counter-argument Lowe presents is quite strong. Germany seemed to be winning the economic race anyway. A big war could disrupt that. As one German industrialist apparently said in 1913, peace was actually what Germany needed for economic victory.
Okay, so what about the role of Russia backing Serbia?
Now, this is a significant factor. Russian support probably did make Serbia bolder, maybe more reckless. And Russia was the first major power to order a full general mobilization, which really escalated things and prompted Germany's response. Why did Russia do it? Partly prestige, not wanting to let the Serbs down again, upholding its role as leader of the Slavs. Partly strategic worries about Austro-German control of the Dardanelles Straits, vital for Russian trade. But looking from the other side, Austria probably should have realized Russia couldn't easily stand aside this time.
But that German blank check to Austria, that seems absolutely pivotal. Germany held Austria back in 1913 during the Balkan Wars, but gave them free rein in 1914. Why the change?
Ah, yes. This is where a lot of the really intense historical debate centers. After the war, the Versailles Treaty put all the blame on Germany. Then, much later in the 1960s, the German historian Fritz Fischer caused a huge stir. He argued, based on new evidence, that Germany had deliberately planned and provoked war. His theory was that German leaders wanted war for world domination, Weltmacht, and maybe also to deal with domestic problems like the rise of socialism. He cited things like diaries and quotes like the army chief Moltke supposedly saying, "War is unavoidable, war the sooner the better." This was hugely controversial, especially in Germany, but it gained a lot of support over time.
So Fischer's view is basically that Germany intentionally pushed for war.
That's the core of it, yes. But there are other interpretations of German motives. Some historians talk about the time factor or the closing met. The idea here is that Germany felt genuinely threatened. They saw Britain's naval power, Russia's massive army reforms. They felt encircled and believed they had to fight a preventive war soon before Russia got too strong, ideally before the end of 1914. Survival, in their eyes. Then there's a third view, that Germany didn't actually want a major war, that Kaiser Wilhelm II and his Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg made a terrible miscalculation. They thought that by backing Austria strongly, they would just scare Russia into staying out, a gamble that went disastrously wrong.
And what about the role of those infamous mobilization plans? The Schlieffen Plan always gets mentioned here.
Yes, historians like Gerhard Ritter and A.J.P. Taylor argued the German Schlieffen Plan was a huge problem. It was seen as incredibly rigid. Its complex railway timetables, once set in motion, were almost impossible to stop. It basically dictated military action and left politicians very little time to negotiate. It assumed France would join Russia, so the plan was to knock out France quickly by going through neutral Belgium before turning to face Russia. Moltke, the army chief, supposedly insisted on it, even when the Kaiser had doubts. It made war seem almost automatic once mobilizations started.
But even that's been questioned more recently, hasn't it?
It has. More recent work, like by Terence Zuber, suggests the Schlieffen Plan might have been just one option among others, not this single, rigid blueprint. Zuber argues its inflexibility might have been exaggerated after the war, perhaps as a way to shift blame onto military planning rather than political decisions. So maybe not quite the unstoppable machine it was once thought to be.
Which kind of leads to the idea of a tragedy of miscalculation.
Exactly. This interpretation, put forward by historians like L.C.F. Turner, argues that the war wasn't inevitable at all. It could have been avoided. Instead, it was caused by a series of blunders by leaders who didn't fully grasp the consequences of their actions. Austria misjudging Russia's reaction, Germany giving that fatal blank check, Russia and Germany assuming mobilization meant war was unavoidable, generals perhaps sticking too rigidly to plans. Bethmann Hollweg's anguished cry later, "Oh, if I only knew," seems to fit this view perfectly.
So weaving all these different threads together, where does Lowe say the balance of historical opinion rests today? Is there anything close to a consensus?
Well, Lowe suggests that a majority of historians, including many German historians now, still lean towards something like Fischer's view that Germany does bear a significant, perhaps primary, responsibility, likely through deliberate risk-taking or provocation. Works by historians like Hamilton and Herwig still point to the German leadership gambling on war for survival before Russia became too powerful. But it's not settled. Newer arguments keep emerging. Books like An Improbable War challenge the inevitability narrative. Samuel Williamson argues Sarajevo really was the decisive trigger for Austria, not just German prodding. And then there's William Mulligan's work from 2010. He makes a strong case that Russia shares at least equal responsibility. Mulligan connects Russia's actions after its defeat by Japan in 1905, its new focus on the Balkans, the rise of nationalism, promises to Serbia, arguing these moves genuinely alarmed Germany and pushed them towards risking war for survival.
That's a really interesting perspective, putting more emphasis back onto Russia's role.
It is, and ultimately, Lowe lands on what feels like a very sensible conclusion. Pinning the blame on just one country is too simplistic. He concludes that Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary must all share a significant portion of the responsibility for the war breaking out in 1914. It was a collective failure.
Wow, it's a truly complex picture. A mind-bending deep dive into how history happens, isn't it? We've seen this perfect storm, really? Shifting power balances, those deep-seated resentments, the tangled alliances, and then just a cascade of miscalculations, blunders. It all came together to push the world over the edge into this catastrophic conflict. It's quite a sobering reminder of how fragile international stability can be.
It really is, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Maybe a final thought for deeper consideration. What broader lessons can we actually take away from 1914 about how things like national anxieties, grand strategic plans, and just the simple human element of miscalculation, how they can all interact, how they can push nations towards conflict, even when maybe some leaders are only expecting or hoping for a small, localized war?
That's a powerful question. And it really underlines the value of digging into these different historical interpretations like Lowe encourages us to do. Understanding why people disagree about the past definitely sharpens our thinking about complex global events, both then and now. Well, that's all we have time for in this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging deep.